Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Fabian motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 844, an act relating to the environment. The message is signed Cal R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate. The report is addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate, and the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 844, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate and all 5 conferees on the part of the House. Fabian moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 844 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the author, Representative Fabian, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is our Environment and Natural Resources Policy and Finance Bill for this year. Before I get into the bill, I do have to say some thank yous. I have one of the greatest, I have the best team in the House, okay? I admit that. And I've told these people many times, Amy Zipko is an incredible community administrator. Kalen Schroeder is terrific as a committee legislative assistant, and Harry Miracle doing research, and Janelle Taylor and Bragg Hegmeyer are just terrific nonpartisan staff to work with. And thank you to you folks. I really do appreciate it. This bill has been a bill that's taken quite a while. As most of you know, the first bill that was passed here was vetoed. We had to roll up our sleeves and work hard with the administration and the different agencies that we have jurisdiction over, and that includes the Department of Natural Resources, MPCA, EQB, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and then we've also got the zoo and Explore Minnesota Tourism, and a couple of others. So our total general fund appropriation was $7.9 million over the base. A number of things that we've tried to accomplish in this bill. We've worked a lot with the different agencies. One of my priorities since I've gotten here in 2011 has been trying to work with cities and businesses to streamline and create efficiencies in the permitting and environmental review process. We've taken a few more steps forward there. We're trying to look out for farmers, trying to create some other alternatives and so forth with regards to the buffers. We have put a lot of time into that buffer reform. The Environmental Quality Board, we've done some reforms there. We're going to be appointing people now by congressional district. We've raised penalties on poachers. We're prohibiting the DNR from doing the lead shot ban until any kind of rulemaking until 2019. And it's nice to, excuse me, it's nice to see that Representative Liebling has read the bill. I see that she's got her blaze pink on, so it's nice to see that. That's going to be legal for you next fall. Okay? And contrary to popular belief, we are not rolling back water quality standards. Okay? We are not gutting the governor's buffer law. We've reached an agreement with the governor. We've reached an agreement with all of the different state agencies that are involved in this bill. And I'm happy that we have it here. I would like to point out just a couple of other things in the bill that are important to me, that are important to a lot of you folks. Starting with the Fairfax situation, the Fort Ridgely Golf Course, the situation with the Ching family down in Plainview. We've gotten that resolved. We've done a lot of work on the demolition landfill permitting things. We've done some things with regards to minnow transportation for our resorts. The timber industry, we've taken some very positive steps for them. They're extremely excited about that. The mining industry is very excited about our bill. I could go on and say a lot of good things about our bill, but with that, Mr. Speaker, I will just stand for any questions or... Oh, yeah. And then I would request a roll call on that, please.
A roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So there are a lot of policy provisions in this bill that are not good for Minnesota, not good for our lakes, our rivers, and our wildlife. And I do have to respond to the comment about rolling back protections for our water. Just because the language in the bill doesn't say we're rolling back protections, that doesn't mean that that's not going to be the outcome, especially when we have major provisions of this bill that were brought forth by the Chamber of Commerce and clearly, written and brought forward by the Chamber. So one thing, I've spoken a lot this year about environmental issues, but I've never had an opportunity to talk about a specific provision in this bill, and that would be the blaze pink for hunting. So as many of you know, I do hunt. And I had hoped when a certain member was no longer serving here that maybe this issue would also disappear, but unfortunately that has not been the case. We did not have the opportunity to hear this bill on the House side. I would have loved to have that debate in committee, but did not have that opportunity. And so, Mr. Speaker, would Representative Fabian yield for a question?
He will yield.
Representative Fabian, how many citizens have testified in favor of this blaze pink provision?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Becker-Finn, in the House, there's been no testimony on this. We've had it in previous years. But I can tell you that when I'm back home and when my granddaughter talks to me about going deer hunting with Grandpa Dan, and I ask her, do you want to wear blaze orange or blaze pink? She wants to wear blaze pink.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would hope that your granddaughter would be interested in hunting for better reasons than the color of her clothing. Would Representative Fabian yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Becker-Finn.
Representative Fabian, I'm just wondering what the problem is that we're trying to solve by adding this provision.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Becker-Finn, I'm not trying to solve a problem. I'm trying to create an opportunity to give people an opportunity to wear the clothing that they want to wear when they go deer hunting. I think that Representative Drazkowski would agree with me that this is a question of liberty, So no, folks, we have heard over and over and over again of how we are losing young people to the casting and blasting sports. Okay, we have. By doing something like this, if it encourages 30, 40, 50, maybe 280, I don't know, people to maybe decide to go deer hunting, what's wrong with that? I think it's great. And like I said, when my granddaughter's going to go hunting for a lot of reasons, she already has a 270 bolt-action rifle that I bought her when she was born, and so do my other grandchildren.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as one of the younger members here, I guess I find it kind of insulting that changing the fashion choices while hunting would be a reason that our young people would be more involved in our hunting sports. I think that doing things like funding the DNR for their different programmings and encouraging people to get involved that way is probably a better way to encourage people to hunt. I don't think that anyone's going to take on getting their firearm safety certification, learning how to hunt, spending hours in the cold in the woods just because they get to wear a certain color. I think that we're actually not solving a problem, we're creating a problem here. And one of those problems is that there are folks who are colorblind who cannot see blaze pink as well as blaze orange. And while I appreciate the comment about liberty, I think when we're talking about our actual safety while hunting, that perhaps our value of safety should be a higher priority than our fashion choices or liberty when it comes to the safety of people hunting. And so, like I said before, there's a lot of bad policy in this bill. And yes, this bill is better than it was the last time we debated these issues. I do think there was some good movement in some areas here, including the hunting and fishing fees. I think that's good for Minnesota. But I guess it could have been worse is not good enough for me. So members, I encourage a no vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I do have quite a few concerns with this bill. I do think it's a little bit better than it was when it first passed the floor, but I still have quite a few concerns with it. And the one that I wanted to highlight is the same as the one Representative Becker-Finn talked about, this zombie blaze pink provision that just won't go away. Like Representative Becker-Finn, I thought, you know, with the previous champion of this provision no longer being in the House, we might finally be free of its grasp. But unfortunately, that does not seem to be the case, and it does not seem to go away. I mean, first of all, I think it's based on a rather questionable assumption that certain people might be more willing to hunt just because of the color that they're wearing. I would really question the assumption based on that. I mean, I'm sure your granddaughter is awesome, Representative Fabian. My daughter's pretty awesome too. She's 7 years old. You know, she might be more willing to go hunting if she were allowed to wear Pokemon clothes when she was hunting. If she had a big shirt with Pikachu on it, she'd be there. She'd be all over that. But that's not really a sound basis for changing state public policy because of what she wants to wear. This is not a question of liberty. This is a question of safety. I happen to be one of the 8% of men who suffer, well, suffer is probably too strong of a word. Really, it hasn't impacted my life all that much, but I do have red-green color blindness. I believe Representative Creshaw is also another person who does in this chamber. The studies that are out there show that it is harder to see blaze pink in the woods than it is to see blaze orange. We picked blaze orange for a reason based on safety. There are no studies out there showing that blaze pink is safer. The studies that are out there show that it might be less safe because a substantial percentage of the population is not able to see it in the woods as easily as blaze orange. So this provision has no basis in fact. It has no basis in science. It's part of just sort of a larger problem with this bill, and there are many provisions in there that don't do what this bill should be doing. This is not what we should be focusing on right now. There's no reason for this provision. So this is just one example of some of the problems in this bill, and that's why I think we should send it back to conference committee so that these provisions can be worked out in favor of positions that are more strongly backed in science. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. On December 12th, my family received some very disturbing news. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. On February 2nd, she had a double mastectomy. Pink is the color to show our support for breast cancer. She's a survivor. You know what? I am proud. I'm a hunter, and I'm absolutely thrilled that I have a choice now to purchase Blaze Pink to show my support for my wife and any other woman who has been diagnosed with breast cancer and who has survived. So thank you very much, Representative Fabian, for giving us this choice. I greatly appreciate it, and my wife thanks you as well.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Fabian yield?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. There was a delete all amendment to your conference committee report published sometime this afternoon, but I understand that's not what became the final conference committee report. Is that correct?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, this is the conference committee report that you have on your desk.
Representative Thiessen.
That part I knew. Thank you. I was wondering when this actual language was first made available to the public. I think it was maybe 2 hours ago.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was made available this afternoon about, I'm not sure, 6 o'clock or so, something like that. Okay, I'd have to go back and look. I can look it up on here. So, okay.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Well, there was something published earlier today, but it's actually not what became this conference committee report. I think this was published at 8:06 p.m. The first time, not published, but the first time we got even the amendment language of what you actually passed in your bill was around 8:06 p.m. and it's now 9:45. So we have a how many page bill is this? 145-page bill that we've had for maybe an hour and a half. And I was just wondering if you think your constituents up in Roseau County have had a chance to review the bill, if he would yield again.
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen, our DE amendment was turned into our conference committee report.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I was reviewing the DE amendment earlier today, and there's stuff in the DE amendment that's not in your conference committee report. So I'm just wondering where this report came from. It was not the same as the DE amendment that was actually posted online. If he would yield again.
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen, this report came to our committee when we met, and it was posted online before that. Like I said, I don't have the time here in front of me, but that's what we did. Okay?
Well, actually, no, it's not okay.
Representative Thiessen.
I mean, this is the problem, members. I mean, you have a report. Nobody in this chamber actually, maybe Representative Fabian might know what's in this report. I suppose you do. But actually, nobody else in this chamber, I think, knows what's in this bill. Nobody's had the time to review this bill. Our constituents certainly had the time to review this bill. And members, this is just the first of what is going to be an avalanche of bills that you're going to be voting on that you have no idea what's in them. I mean, this is kind of outrageous that we're doing this yet once again. 2015 we did this, 2016 we did this, 2017 we did this. Over and over and over again. And maybe the people in Minnesota don't care. You know, that might be the case. I don't know, maybe you think that that's the case. But the bottom line is we should not be voting on bills. I mean, how many people have told their constituents we should have at least 24 hours to review a bill? How many of the new members told their constituents that we should have at least 20? Would Representative Jessup yield?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Do you have any idea what's in this bill? And do you think you should have 24 hours so you and your constituents should review it?
Representative Jessup.
Mr. Speaker, Representative, I believe we came in to this session in January with the objective that we were going to accomplish these bills much earlier than has been done in past legislative sessions. We left on Easter break, and I believe we were approximately 3 weeks ahead of a normal legislative schedule. There was discussions with the executive branch, even at that time, on these omnibus bills. It is a disappointment. You are correct that we are at this stage. But I would suggest that the planning that has gone in on this particular legislative session was much more organized so that we would not be in this particular position. Do I have an understanding of what's in this bill? Yes, I do. We have been through it a number of times since that Easter break.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. So, Representative Jessup, so you, in the last hour and a half, you've had a chance to read this view and understand what's actually in it. It's not the bill. I mean, the bill that was passed when you, back at the Easter break, was vetoed, as you know. And so it seems to me that what you're saying is that you actually wish you would actually have time to review this bill. And you haven't had the time to review this bill, and I think that you know that that's the case. This is a reason that we should send this back. I don't know how close we are to getting done with this session, of course. That's being decided somewhere in some other room in this building that no one on this floor except maybe 4 or 5 of us have any input into. And, you know, maybe that's the way it should be. Or, I don't know, and I don't think that's the way it should be. But certainly, Representative Jessup, you'd agree your constituents have no idea what's in this bill. And it seems to me they should have a chance to weigh in with you and say whether they support undermining clean water or not undermining clean water. It seems to me that they should have input, be able to give input to you to you know, say they absolutely support what's in here. But they have no chance to do that. And that's problematic, members. giving us an hour and a half to actually review a bill on this House floor, giving our constituents that much time to review a bill on our floor. I know that people didn't run on that. I know that people talked about this in the campaign trail because I saw the literature. It's a pledge that people have made. We had a chance back in January, to Representative Jessup's point, we had a chance back in January to actually change our rules here on the House floor to avoid exactly this kind of problem. And yet the Republicans chose not to. They chose not to adopt those kind of rules. So anyway, members, I would suggest that we send this bill back to conference committee. We don't even have to send it back, quite frankly. What we should do is lay this conference committee report on the table. We can give people till tomorrow morning to take it up. There'll still be time to finish the session on time. But at least we'd actually know what's in the bill. And I think it's legislative malpractice for anybody to vote yes on this bill or to vote no on this bill, to vote at all on this bill until you have a chance to actually know what's in it. And if you want to go back and explain to your constituents that it's okay to vote on a bill that you have no idea what's in it, well then you should go do that, and good luck.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, and just a couple of points. I think it's, you know, we had our conference committee. The conference committee report is signed by all 10 members of the conference committee. And we followed the House rules with regards to that. And largely the changes that were made, the few changes that were made in this bill relative to the previous bill that was here were as a result of working with the administration and addressing their concerns.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're working with the administration, but I don't represent the administration. I represent my constituents. And my constituents want time to review the bill, and I want time to review the bill, and every one of you should want time to review the bill. So, members, again, I think we should not take this up right now. And again, anyway, here we go again. We do this all the time, and we should change it at some point.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson, P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to say a thanks to Chair Torkelson and Fabian for their work trying to come up with some compromise language on buffer legislation. I do have a quick question. I see that there's going to be a waiver available now, but one of them, if they had a question, Chair Fabian, if you'd stand for a question.
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The effective date for public water still remains at November 1st of this year. And my concern is that as of that date, this becomes a mandatory program, conservation program. At that time, do we lose eligibility for federal CRP to be used to be put into a buffer strip? Any clarification? I know that's a federal issue, but are you aware, any chance that they'll work with that, or is this a hard and fast deadline now, November 1st?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, thank you for your concern. What we did in this situation with extending the deadline, the waiver time, it became apparent to us that the Board of Water and Soil Resources, who's been putting together the alternative practices, has worked on that, and they have it as a draft. But those have not been formally adopted by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So as you know, you were home last weekend planting corn or doing whatever in soybeans. Crops are in the ground now, and a lot of those crops aren't going to be harvested until after the November 1st deadline. So we worked with the administration trying to come up with some language. So what we created here is, because we don't want you to have to mow down your corn and plant a buffer strip before it's harvested. So what we've done is we've created a waiver situation where you just have to basically request a waiver of your local SWCD, and then that gives you out until July 1 of the next year. And then at that point, the 11 months that they talk about with regards to enforcement, the APO would kick in. And I can't answer the question about CRP. I might be able to answer one about CPR, but not CRP.
Representative Anderson.
Thanks again, Mr. Speaker. Well, I appreciate the efforts, and that's important in getting compliance, but I am concerned about the federal losing the eligibility for CRP because this becomes a mandatory program. Maybe Chair Torkelson has some insight into if that would be the case on November 1st.
Are you asking him to yield?
Yes, I am, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you, Representative Anderson. The question of enrollment and re-enrollment in federal programs has been an ongoing discussion with the federal government. I would just point out that it's never been a problem in the past. We've had shoreland ordinances in this state for decades, and enrollment and re-enrollment in CRP and other federal programs has always been allowed. It's never been an issue where it's been restricted by the federal government. The newest agreement signed with the federal government involving CREP actually has language specific to this that makes it clear that, at least for that program, that enrollment and re-enrollment in a federal program is not interfered with by the buffer law, and we are in talks with the federal government now, not me personally, but our agencies are trying to clear this up, because we do not have any intention of restricting anyone from being able to take part in the federal programs that are available to landowners and operators across the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Anderson.
The member from Pine, Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Fabian, Chair Fabian, yield for a question, please?
He will yield. Representative Sundin.
Chair Fabian, I really did enjoy many sessions in the committee, and I learned a lot this year. It was enlightening, but there's a few things that are left unsaid here. We watched a $22 million ping pong game with how soil and water conservation districts are going to be funded. I don't know what the future lies for them for funding. It's pretty stressful for those organizations that are trying to do the good work out in Minnesota. But I would like to know about the waiver system for the buffers. So who's actually making those decisions out in the field as far as waivers, as far as administering any rules out in the field?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the way the waiver situation is set up, working with the Board of Water and Soil Resources and the administration on this language, again, like I was responding to Representative Anderson's question about that, when we get to that November 1st deadline, an individual property owner will be able to go and talk to their local Soil and Water Conservation District office, their technicians or whomever, and they'll be able to apply for that waiver, and they'll work together on that. So it will be decided at the local SWCD office.
Representative Sundin.
Will Representative continue to yield?
He will. Representative Sundin.
Representative Fabian, are we talking about the technicians that are actually going out in the trucks and viewing the situation to make those decisions?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my understanding that, yes, it could be any of these SWCD employees.
Representative Sundin.
If he'll continue.
He will.
I'm just wondering, I know some of those technicians. I met some of them. They're bright young people, but that's kind of an entry-level job for this field of work. And I'm just wondering, these are important decisions that are being made out in the field, and they're the least experienced people. Are you confident they can make those decisions?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Sundin, you know them, I know them. These are good people. They can make good decisions. I'm very confident in them.
Well, thank you.
Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm worried about that. You know, if I go to a dentist, I go to an experienced dentist. If I need some work done on my car, I go to an experienced mechanic. I'm thinking that these technicians are pretty green at their jobs. I know they're bright young people and educated, but I'm just wondering if there's a better way. I think we're just rushing through this a little too quick.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, I appreciate the work you've been doing on the freeway landfill. I want it cleaned up as much as you do. But I'm looking at the language on page 115, and it says that the facility won't be cleaned up until after the legislature makes an appropriation for that purpose. So I know you don't have $70 million of cash to put in this bill. But my question is, do you have $70 million committed in the bonding bill to do the actual cleanup?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Wagenius, no, I don't. And in the conversations with MPCA in the last few weeks, it's become apparent to me and to them, the information that they've given me, is that there's going to be a long process to go through, up to a year or more before they actually start the cleanup. We have some money appropriated in the bill. I believe it's $3 million to get the studies and so forth started and get the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency working with EPA to get this process started. And then after that, the indication is that they're going to come forward with some sort of a request for the cleanup.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I look at the language of the bill, what you are asking the state to do is to take over the liability for this landfill with no cash. That's okay if you had bonding money set aside. Our Constitution says you cannot take over a liability without an appropriation. Think back to the letter that we all got from the Speaker, who said we can't get a salary increase until there's an appropriation made. That's Article 9, Section 1 of our Constitution. The reason I bring it up is because I did the landfill bill, the one we have now. It was about 20 years ago. And the attorney, I remember so clearly the Attorney General's office saying, you can't do what you want to do. You cannot put this kind of liability onto the state without the money to pay for it. So when we passed the bill, we had the money to pay for it. And at that time, it was $400 million. We had a mix of funding. We don't need to go into that, but what we do need to do is respect our Constitution. So I know Representative Hansen had a bill that said, and Representative Hansen is going to correct me if I'm wrong, but it said that it appropriated the whole $70 million. But what it did it in stages, with $2 million this biennium, or this coming biennium, and 35 in each of the next 2 bienniums. So the commitment of the state is there. Only $2 million counts against your target. I mean, it could be $2 million. I think that's a good number. Could be $1.5 million. It could be $3 million. But it's a small amount to count against your target to actually say to Minnesotans, you're going to get the job done, that this isn't a fake. I don't want it to be a fake. I want you to get it cleaned up. I think all of us want to get it cleaned up. But it is $70 million, and we got to pay for it. So there is no reason to procrastinate. We have a bonding bill that's up now. And we have a Constitution that says that you have to appropriate the money. So that's one thing. But there's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. You said you're not rolling back environmental quality standards in this bill. That's not a true statement. First of all, it assumes that our environmental standards actually protect our water right now, but they don't. Look at what's happening to our drinking water. Our environmental standards are not protecting our drinking water. But beyond that, I am looking at the rollback, which is section 160, where you say that if a facility, a new wastewater treatment facility is built, then that community or whoever owns that facility does not have to spend any more money for 16 years. Well, we may have an intervening standard, say for nitrogen. So you are rolling back standards, no question about it. For those of us who drink the Mississippi River water, let me remind you that there are 203 wastewater treatment systems in the upper Mississippi Basin. That's what we drink. That's what 1 million Minnesotans drink. Beyond the rollback that is in this bill with the 16 years, that provision in the bill also provides an incentive for folks not to do a new wastewater treatment system. So as long as they can put off, say, doing putting in a system that takes care of the phosphorus, as long as they can put it off, they still have 16 more years. So procrastinate for 5 years, and then you have your 16 years, you have 21 years now before you upgrade. And why am I particularly concerned about this? Besides the fact that we drink the water, when you put in a nitrogen system, which is probably going to be our next standard, it's likely, when you put in a nitrogen system, it has the side benefit of taking out those kinds of pollutants that are endocrine disruptors. But you're procrastinating that. You're harming our drinking water. So we have drinking water problems in the legacy bill. We have drinking water problems in this bill, and they are major. I don't understand why we're not respecting other folks' drinking water.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your point to parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, would it be the norm for a conference committee report to have the time stamp on the bill in front of us in addition to the date stamp? Would that be the practice?
Representative Hansen, could you restate the question, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would it be the practice of the House to have the time stamp on a conference committee report in addition to a date stamp?
Representative Hansen, I believe that your question pertains to a question that would be more pointed and directed at the revisor's office.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm unable to ask them that question, but maybe if Representative Carlson L. would yield for a question as the most senior of the House. If it is a practice of the House, it's been the past practice to have a time stamp in addition to a date stamp on a conference committee report. If he would yield.
He will yield.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hansen, I'm not sure. I know the time is stamped when the bill is presented. You know, for example, to the governor, we get the time on amendments and so on that are presented in committee. I'm just not sure what the answer would be, and I think the chief clerk is researching that right now. I'd be speculating, quite honestly, at this point.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did go to the conference committee meeting that was called at 7 o'clock that had a time change and a location change at least once. I don't know if Representative Eklund is here, but I know that that kept changing in terms of the time and the location during the day. And then I did find a seat there, and I did get a hard copy of the bill. And there was a very rapid run through of the bill by Senate staff. I think even Representative Fabian, I don't know if it was you or Senator Ingebrigtsen, mentioned made an allusion to that fast run through of it. And one of the questions one of the statements that was made, I believe, by the staff was that there was a change to the provisions relating to calcareous fens. So if Representative Fabian would yield.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, could you tell me the difference between the bill that was posted and then it had several amendments written for it, and then this conference or committee report? What's the difference in how calcareous fens are treated in the bill that was posted at, I think, 2 or 3 maybe, and then this bill? What's the difference? Because it was mentioned that there was a difference. I would like to know what the difference is to help me in my decision making.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Hansen, what section of the bill are you referring to?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, it would be section 112 on page 98 and section 113 on page 99.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, the word was changed from shall to may, and I'm looking for that when making the determination under the rules adopted in the subdivision. They said it was a small technical adjustment. Maybe, okay? May be considered, okay?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Fabian, on line 98.24, the commissioner may allow instead of shall allow. Is that?
Are you asking to continue
if he would yield? Is that the point?
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Yes, I'm sorry. 98.24, in fact, I even have it highlighted here, Representative Hansen, on when I was going through the bill today. I was able to keep up with them. The commissioner may allow instead of must.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, how many times do we consider may versus shall and shall versus may? They have big meaning. And this indicates that I don't think this bill was this conference committee report was ever posted for the public to see. I know there was a delete all. I know there were hard copies. And that's why we should vote to send it back. We should not vote for adoption. How many more shalls to may are there in here? Or how many mays to shall? It's important for Minnesotans to read this. I will give you credit. I did see a vote. Actually, there was a vote for approving the report this time. And this particular provision, I actually took a photo of it because it was calcareous fens, and that's a big issue. They're pretty rare. The issue here, members, is, as Representative Thiessen said, here we are in the dark of night, about 10:15, in the dark of night, as was predicted, and we thought we'd be at the rollbacks and the post and pass. We'd post it, you'd pass it, you'd post it, you'd pass it. That was what kind of our expectation might be, but I guess we're just going to pass it. You're just going to pass it without a lot of time. I hope, and maybe it's just a little bit to ask, maybe we could get the time stamp on the future bills that we're going to be hearing. Maybe they could get online for the public to see for a little bit of time in the next day for people to vote on. But right now, we should vote no on adoption.
Representative Fabian. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we suspend House Rule 1.50 so that the House may meet past midnight.
Representative Pepin moves a waiver of suspension of Rule 1.05. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. No. Motion prevails. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, as most people around here know, or at least staff knows, I'm fairly challenged when it comes to technology. But I have our committee page here, and the conference committee report is plainly posted on the conference committee report, or there as a conference committee report, and it's also been sent out on the listserv.
Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll on the motion to adopt the conference committee report. Clerk will close the roll. There being 83 ayes, 32 nays, the motion to adopt the conference committee prevails, and the clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File Number 844, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker and members, we have a 145-plus page bill with about 30-some pages of appropriations. Process has broken down in the Minnesota legislature. The debate we just had on adoption is an indication. I hope that Minnesotans are watching. I think they are. I think they're paying attention. And they're going to pay attention a lot in the next day. as more bills come forward with little time to review. Now, if they're reviewed by a few people in a back room or a basement somewhere else, that's one thing, but being reviewed in the daylight is another. This bill, this conference committee report, has gotten better, but it still requires, or I recommend, a no vote. There are still provisions in here. We talked about a couple of the minor ones, Blaze Pink, the lead ban delay. Representative Wagenius alluded to the 16-year compliance. So that'd be like giving a baby a driver's license and saying you're going to be compliant in 16 years. You don't have to meet the requirements for 16 years. That has impact on people. It has impact on water. It was discussed during the debate about the chamber bill, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities bill, the irrigators bill. Those are the brands of the bills that are included in this conference committee report. And there have been changes to them. But it's important for us when we're talking about natural resources, whether it's the Department of Natural Resources, the Pollution Control Agency, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, to think about the people's needs and the people's involvement, the people's process, and the people's outcome. Although this has become better, we can do better, and we should. I understand a lot of this is likely to become law. And that may resolve some of the concerns of those stakeholders, those special interests. But I have no illusion that they'll be back wanting more, because they always do. And I think the people want more. They want to be involved. There's an awakening of the public where they're asking to participate, and hopefully in the future we will.
Further discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I wanted to call attention to a couple of related provisions concerning permitting. You'll find one related to environmental impact statements on page 127. That's lines 18 through 20. What this does is it allows the polluter to actually prepare the environmental impact statement. We have some of that going on already, but in this provision, we're really delegating to the polluter that's going to apply for this permit preparation of certain things in the EIS that the publicly accountable agency continues to do. And this is akin, members, to the fox guarding the hen house. I really think this sets up a conflict of interest, and we ought to be really very concerned about this, because this will have a real detrimental impact on the environment, and it just shifts so much of the review process to the very polluters that will be applying for the permit. And so then we get to the actual permit. These are DNR and PCA permits. You can look on page 38, lines 23 through 30, and page 120, lines 26 through 33. And what those provisions involve, members, are the actual expedited permit process. So a polluter can expedite their permit if they pay for it. So you have the polluter with the money, with the resources, now paying the agency in order to have an expedited permit. So what these two related provisions do is shift so much of the power and responsibility to the large, often large corporations that have tremendous resources, political and otherwise, to get their way, to get their perspective approved in this permitting process. It's really unprecedented. We have not done this before. It's a huge rollback of the way in which we traditionally do our environmental permitting in the state. And I think it's a real setback for those who want to hold these large polluters accountable to even some basic environmental standards. So these are not our values. This is not the Minnesota that we've come to expect. And again, it's a tremendous shift, an unprecedented shift of power away from the people and into the hands of these large corporate interests and polluters. And that's one of many reasons, Mr. Speaker and members, I'm voting no on this bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Chair Fabian, I'm interested in the provision on school trust lands. In the bill, you're taking $1.1 million out of the school trust account. And I'd like to understand the rationale, and if you could identify the author of the bill that proposed this, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dabney, what section of the bill are you referring to, please?
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, I believe it is in Article 1. I thought I was referring to the school trust section, but I believe it's in Article 1. Yes, it is.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you be a little more specific? Give me the page, please.
Representative Dabney.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Fabian, this is a 145-page bill that was only recently posted for the public and members to be able to see. I'm sorry, I don't have the page and line reference for you. I assume that as the chair that you would have that.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, I apologize, Representative Dabney. I would appreciate if you give me the page. I'm looking through it here quick. I'm trying to find it.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly Representative Fabian, it's late, we're all tired, we're making extremely slow progress as the legislature this year. There's 26 hours left, and this is only the third of 10 bills. I understand some of the stress and strain, but I don't know that we need to talk about the exact language. I'm asking, what's the rationale for withdrawing $1.1 million from the permanent school fund and giving it over to the school trust funds director? You'll find it on page 34, lines 23 through 32. And again, who was the author of the bill that initially proposed this? Thank you.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Dabney, I believe that this was a DNR proposal that they brought forward.
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Fabian, what is the use of the money? Because as you well know, being from the Northland, the school trust lands are in the state constitution. It is to build a corpus in perpetuity with payments to our school districts off of the values, whether it's mineral leases or lumber or timber or whatever it may be, the uses of the land, and this is drawing money away from that. And I'm trying to understand the rationale for withdrawing $1.1 million out of school funds in this bill.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I've worked fairly closely with the director of the school trust fund over at in his office, Aaron Van Linde. Director Van der Linde. And this is a request for them to be able to expedite and more efficiently run their office so that they can actually do a better job of maximizing the fiduciary responsibility of the trust fund to get the dollars out to the students in the schools.
Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Fabian. I would caution the body. I believe if you were to go back to the legislative auditor report of a few years ago on the school trust lands, there's been real issues in the past with school trust land revenues going to the administration of the school trust lands and not going to the schools as the state constitution requires those funds to go. So I see this, I hear the rationale. I would caution us on this and leave those concerns before the body. Thank you, Representative Fabian.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Representative Fabian would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, this is going to have to do with page 104, and what I'm looking at is basically lines 104.21 through 104.23, and this is in transferring a permit, a water appropriations permit. I'll give you a second to get over to the page, and the reason I'm raising the question is the way it's written here, and I know we discussed this in committee, raised some questions in my mind at the time we heard it in committee, and I want to circle back to those this evening. Number one is it appears here that the way the transfer would be is that when a person sells a piece of property, that if there's a water permit with it, it would transfer over to the new owner buying the land. The question I have is, it appears that the permit would go over in whole. And some of the questions I have are, number one, in the areas where we have water management provinces established in the state, where, example, in the Northeast Metro, we've got a water management area that's been established by the DNR. And one of the reports that the USGS has said that based on modeling that they have done, that they have noticed that if they reduce pumping out of wells in the area by 30%, some of the affected lakes will rebound by 1.5 feet. So it appears that in some areas, pumping out of the aquifer is having a direct impact on levels of the lake, which are public waters. And I'm wondering, in that kind of instance, is the way you have this written here, does it mean that the amount that was allocated has to be automatically transferred, or in a water management area, would they be allowed to reduce the permit to meet, in this instance, say if they were to determine 30% is what is needed to bring the lake levels back?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fisher, the requirements of the permit, it says right here that as long as they are in compliance, and then there's some references to the sections of laws. I'm not totally familiar with that. I know that Representative Newberger has worked a great deal on this issue and has worked closely with the DNR on this, and this language has been signed off by them. I'm sure that they have a lot of concerns about a lake that's affected in your area or any other area. So I'm confident that those things have been taken into consideration when this language has been drafted.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. Could I follow up with another question for Representative Fabian, please?
He will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another concern that I have with the language we have here, it is starting to feel like we might be starting to change the policy of what water is handled in our state. Currently in our state, the water is a public water. All the waters are owned by the state, by the public as a whole, and we've not had water being followed with what the property rights are. That's something that is similar out west. And my concerns is out west, when they started traveling by landowner and then stripping the rights out, in some states it's gotten to the point where when the rain falls from the sky, that people can no longer collect the rain falling from the sky because of previous allocations where people are taking a look at, you can sell the water rights back and forth, and they're no longer that they no longer belong to the rights of the state. And I want to see if there's some clarification on that. Is it your intention that we still recognize that the waters that are being allocated here are waters of the state and are not intended to be followed by property by property?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fisher, yes, that's my intention. And the purpose of the bill here, or the language in the bill, is there's been some cases, and I've talked a lot to DNR about this, they seldom, if ever, do not transfer a permit when there's, and I'm sure you're familiar with this probably even better than I am, but we would like to be able to do is that when there is a succession of, say, a family farm from the mom and dad to the son and daughters or something like that, we want to be able to make sure that when that transfer is made or when they sell it to Representative Grunhagen, they want to be able to make sure that there's a value to the land, because you know that if the permit is not transferred with that, the value of the property is the value of the property is connected to the ability to irrigate. And so in this case, what we've tried to do is create a little more regulatory certainty, working with the Department of Natural Resources and their water people, and this is what we came up with, and I'm comfortable with it.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Fabian. And I understand the concerns that you're addressing there, and I can appreciate the fact when you've got family farm going to family farm, you want to try to make sure that things are kept in whole along those lines. And what I'm wanting to make sure is that we're not setting a precedence where we're changing our water law here. And also very concerned about the fact that some of the areas that we're dealing with on the water issues are newer things that are coming up, particularly when we've got water management areas. Those are things that we've not had before. And I've not heard enough to really address that part if you're in a water management area and they have to reduce that. And I'm a little concerned with the DNR because they've not had that experience. They're just now starting to work those things through in areas where they've got water management areas. So I just want to raise concerns in those parts of this bill. Thank you, sir.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to bring attention to, and I guess for those following along at home, if this is the version posted online, I'm looking at page 67.9, and I'm just going to read it. So it's petition for contested case hearing. Any person owning property that will be affected by the proposed operation, or any federal, state, or local government having responsibilities affected by the proposed operation identified in the application for a permit to mine under section 93.481 may file a petition with the commissioner to hold a contested case hearing on the completed application. And I bring this up based on the first line in this provision, any person owning property. So let's think about that. So right now, more than those who own property can bring a contested case hearing. Perhaps you fish downriver from a facility. Maybe you visit a state park that's near that area. Maybe you rent property, as many Minnesotans do. And I think it's bad policy for us to go down this path of limiting the rights of the public to participate based on ownership of land, because you're really limiting people's ability to point out issues they may have with a permit, or really have those contested case hearing rights that they currently have and should have based on their wealth. And we talk a lot here about disparities, and this is really a place where you would be cutting out folks who don't actually have the means to own property that would be affected by a proposed operation. So I wanted to make sure in this 45-page bill that folks are aware that this provision is in this bill. And then second, I just wanted to point out, because this may be my first term, but I do know that you should always read the repealers. And so I'm wondering, Representative Fabian, if Representative Fabian would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Becker-Finn.
Representative Fabian, I'm wondering if you could describe for the public and the members what is being repealed in section 84.026 subdivision 3.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Becker-Finn, thank you. Which page are you looking at?
Representative Becker-Finn.
It's page 144. It's the second to last page in the repealer.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's which one?
Representative Becker-Finn.
The first one, so 84.026 subdivision 3.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Becker-Finn, that is the statute that DNR brought to us in their policy bill that's being repealed. And I'm not exactly sure which one that is. I can look it up real quick.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Fabian. It's not necessarily necessary to do that. My point was that there's a lot in this bill, and if you had followed Section 84.026 Subdivision 3, it leads you to a subdivision that says regarding contractual and grant agreements made by the DNR shall be processed according to section 16C.05. So actually you would need then to go read all of 16C.05. So my point here is that when we have so little time to go through a bill this big, there are actually more pages of reading and analyzation that we need to do to really see what we're doing here. So I would, again, this bill is better than other things we've discussed this year, but it could have been worse is not a reason to support this, and I hope folks will vote no.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Chair Fabian would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Bly.
Thank you. It's not a tough question. I noticed on page 143 and line 143.7, there's a minnow importation risk report. I didn't sit on the Environment Committee this biennium, but I have in the past, and I know that the DNR has had concerns about importation of minnows. And you're asking for a report that reviews the Arkansas Bait Certification Program, and I'm not sure what that is. Could you explain that for me?
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bly, just a little background on this first, okay? It's been brought to our attention from several different entities in the fishing industry in the state of Minnesota that there are a shortage of golden shiner minnows. Now, if you fish where I do up on Lake of the Woods, we've got lots of lake shiners around, so come on up and I'll take you out there and show you how well they work. But shiners and lake shiners that are there are difficult to keep. These golden shiners, from what I understand, are a hardier type of shiner. The industry has asked us to make those shiners more available because of the shortage that exists. So we've responded to the concerns of resorts and bait dealers and bait shops and so forth, bait wholesalers. And what's going on here is at first we just wanted to be able to import those shiners into the state. It's my understanding that several other states do, if not almost all states do, allow the importation from those shiners facilities in Arkansas. They have to come in certified and all that sort of stuff. DNR had some reservations about that particular situation. So what we've done here is we're requiring the Department of Natural Resources to work with the University of Minnesota to present a report to the legislature so that we can make a determination, are the biosecurity situations that they're using in Arkansas acceptable to residents and the people here in the state of Minnesota, to make sure that we're not importing any aquatic invasive species along with those. The degree to which I can explain to you, I can't explain what the Arkansas Bait Review Certification Program is. What we're doing is asking the University of Minnesota to look into that along with the DNR to see if it is something that if those minnows are something we could be bringing into the state safely.
Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. And would Representative Fabian yield for one more question?
He will yield. Representative Bly.
Thank you. And I know I've been fishing up north and have run out of shiners, so I know that it can be a problem. But I'm curious, though, when they look at importing the shiners, and maybe you can't answer this, I don't know, but are there concerns about being able to tell the difference between the Shiner minnows and say some of the carp, the invasive carp, you know, that was down there in Arkansas? That would be a concern, I guess, that I would have, that we might be importing fish that could get away and then be a problem in the northern lakes. I'm just asking that. If you can answer that, please. Thank you.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Bly. That's precisely why we're doing the study.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight we've been hearing an awful lot about folks at home who might be listening and wanting to get accurate information and getting a chance to review some things. And I'd like to take a moment to correct the record on something that was said a little bit earlier tonight as it relates to the school trust lands. And again, for those of you in the chamber, because we like to say, can you find it, or should I just tell you where it is? Pick up a copy of the DE, page, the same section that Representative Dabney was talking about, Article 1, Section 9. Let me explain to you what's going on in there. In Article 1, Section 9, it talks about the forestry suspense account. Contrary to what you might have been led to believe tonight, that is not a part of the corpus. What's the corpus? It's the money that is generated from the management and sale of assets that are associated with school trust lands. The suspense account is an operating account. Sometimes you'll pick up the newspaper or turn on television and they'll say, what happened 25 years ago today? What happened 15 years ago today? What happened 5 years ago today? Well, let me tell you what happened almost 5 years ago today in this very chamber. A member in this chamber by the name of Denise Dietrich, who is a Democrat member of this body, and I put through the creation of the School Trust Lands Commission. And today, representing you in that commission are Representative Sandstead, Slocum, Kunish-Bodine, myself, as well as Chair Lewick and Representative Lehman. All right? And there's a like number of people in the Senate. And one of the things that we charged the DNR and the School Trust Lands Director to do was to prioritize the lands that are used here in the state of Minnesota that are owned by the trust. And each and every one of us in this chamber and the one across the way here at the Capitol, ladies and gentlemen, are trustees. 201 of us, along with the governor, 202 people that have to manage these lands and make sure that they're as productive as they possibly can, using sound environmental procedures. And what was represented here tonight is somehow there's a nefarious activity. We're taking money from the kids. No, folks, this is about continuing to further what we're doing with the school trust lands. And for those of you at home who aren't familiar with what the school trust lands are, when the state of Minnesota became a state, in every township, at least one section of land needed to be set aside. What's a section of land? 640 acres. Think about the little house on the prairie where maybe Representative Marquardt, maybe little Johnny went there too. I'm not sure, in addition to the Ingalls girls, but maybe little Johnny was there too, all right? But nonetheless, when we're talking about the school trust lands, the schoolhouse is on there, you lease space, you raise money for crops, you paid the school teacher to educate the kids. Minnesota doubled down, section 16 and 36, and scattered all across the state of Minnesota are these lands. And all this provision does is says, let's take some money from the operating account in managing these lands to continue to further manage them better. Contrary again to what you might have been led to believe here on the House floor tonight, there is no nefarious activity, no one stealing from the kids in Article 1, Section 9. So for all of you at home who are paying close attention to this, I wanted to set the record straight as the person who's been championing this pretty much since day one when I got to the Minnesota legislature. Mr. Speaker, members, thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Appreciate the robust debate here this evening. Robust. Look at Gruenhagen, and I think about the best here. So, a lot of things that happened in this bill. The conversation here this evening was germane, and I appreciate that. So, I'd appreciate a green vote. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 83 ayes, 51 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.